going to take us through the next features of Graphite platform. Welcome, Chris.
Excellent.
Please
Thank
start.
you, Vijayta. Great. Hi, guys. Since it's a holiday, I'm going to try and make this webinar pretty short, so we can go back to whatever it is that we were doing. In case you can't hear me properly, please, just chat to everyone, and then I'm sure someone will alert me, and we can take care of that. What we're going to look at today is we're going to review a complex project. In the last webinar, I started looking at it. There were some issues because I had manually updated some files. And so that's one thing to remember. If you manually update files, which, only advanced users will usually do, and if something is wrong, Graphite will, either crash or give you an error. So I just wanted to mention that, and I had done that, and that's why we couldn't do unit tests on that project. So let me tell you, in the next slide, we're going to see all the different things that we're going to see in this project. How to do complex entity modeling, how to look at complex behaviors, things like inheritance and polymorphism, role-based authorization, unit testing, good UI design, and how to upload and view files. So let's start with that project. What I'm going to first do is show you the requirements that we received for this project, and then we're going to look at the application for a few minutes, and then we'll jump into Graphite and look at the details. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint. I'm going to share a PDF now. Give me 1 second here. Okay, share PDF. Okay, great. So the client basically provided us a requirement document that's about 600 pages. Basically, what this is it's an application to process flood insurance. So whenever someone buys a home in the U.S., they also automatically have to buy flood insurance, especially if their house is near a river, lake, or any other form of, or near the ocean, as in the case like near a beach or something like that. So what they have to do is they have to fill up this application. Insurance company will go through underwriting, then they will approve the policy and charge them a certain premium. So what we're going to see today is how that premium is calculated, and it's an extremely complex calculation. I'm going to show you that first in the document. So if I go to page 83, so from this page, next 20 pages are one calculation on how to calculate what the customer has to pay the insurance company yearly to get that flood insurance. So it's obviously a really, really complex calculation that would take months to build if you're handwriting code. In Graphite, I think one person was able to build this in less than 2 weeks or so. There are also rate tables. So based on how your house is, like, okay, how many people live in the house? How high is the house from the ground? So based off those different rates, your insurance is calculated. Also, another thing that they provided was the actual application itself, the insurance application itself. So as you can see, so we implemented a screen to take in this information from the user. And finally, another important information they provided us was these testing cases. So you have all these like test data and the premium that you have to calculate. So you have to, after building your application, you have to prove that all the calculations are done perfectly. So this is what's a requirements document. Using the requirements document, we built the functional, we built the entity design, we built the UI design as I had shown to you guys during the webinar where we discussed software development lifecycle process. So I'm going to stop this and I'm going to open up the application, show you the premium calculation and adding of an application, and then maybe even a file upload, and then we'll jump into the Graphite Studio and see how we built that project. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share my virtual machine now. Okay, so that's the application. I'm going to log out. Well, we'll go back into it. Okay, so I'm going to IIS. The application is located on my local machine, so I can go into IIS, push the content view here, push content, and go to the login screen. I'm also going to show you role-based authorization. So first, I'm going to log in as an agent. So in this case, well, let's log in as a super user, which is Scott H. So it takes you to the screen where you can manage users. You can set up any number of users here. And if you click on it, it fills it up. As you can see, this security group, this person, John Y, is an agent. Now there's this manage security groups button here. So when I click on it, it takes you to this page. Here is where you can choose the different security groups and all the screens in the page, in the application, all the screens show up in this drop down. So if I, for example, choose new business home, it now shows all the elements in new business home. And as you can see here, the agent is allowed to see everything in that screen except the status item. So let's give permission for that person to view the status item. When we do look at role-based authorization, we'll uncheck this and see what happens on the screen. So I'm going to log out as the system administrator and log back in as the agent, which is that user John Y, the only user in the system. So I go in as login. And again, when you design screens with Graphite, they're automatically responsive. As in, if you do Control-Shift-I and open up the Google Developer Tools and click on this, you can notice how when the application turns into a phone mode, it automatically reorganizes the screen in a responsive way. So during coding this application, I didn't have to worry about that. Graphite automatically took care of that for you. And similar to role-based authorization, that screen that I showed you where we unchecked and checked the status item, that whole screen is generated for you. You don't have to worry about it. But these screens, business screens, you have to generate or you have to build. So anyway, moving on to this Get Quote link, I click on it, we go to the Get Quote screen. So here's a complex screen right here. I'm going to choose some values just as an agent. So what will happen is an agent will come to your house, you give them all the information about your house, they type it in to see how much you have to pay for the year. So that's the use case we're going to mimic right now. So I'm going to pick a county. I'm going to pick a flood zone that shows where the house is located. I'm going to say it's a single family house. There's no basement. Number of floors, 1 floor in the house. It's the primary residence for the person. Here, all the stuff is located above ground level. House was built in 1975. And I want to get $60,000 in insurance coverage, $10,000 for all the stuff inside the house, and I push quote. Now, if you notice, it actually calculates the insurance 7 times. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in terms of performance, you can notice when I push quote, it's almost instantaneous. That 20 pages of calculation to calculate that number and that number and that number took literally a few milliseconds. So that's, again, one of the things about Graphite, the performance. Why did it calculate 7 times? this deductible, it calculated, it showed different options for the customer. So now if you want to apply for this, I push apply, and it takes you to this screen where you can enter that application that I showed you in the requirements document. Here's a tabbed interface with Graphite. And so as you can see, you can tab through this screen and enter information and submit it. So let's quickly add some information here. I'll put waiting period. I'm not going to enter information that's not required. So here's a case where on the on change of the switch box, I picked up the data that was entered in the first tab and brought it in here. So those are done using page instructions. So in the next webinar, I'm going to go over how to build good screens, how to use page instructions. So those are the page instructions are the shapes that will help you update a page from within a controller view behavior. What is a controller view behavior? We'll look at that more in detail, but basically any flowchart that starts with on click, on change, and things like that. So anyway, I'm going to push next here, go through some of this stuff. I don't want to enter any not required information because we're quickly going through this. So I push next. Here, I check all my information. So the information that you entered in the quote, it brings it in here, so you can basically don't have to retype. Now I push submit, and then it shows the detail of the calculation. Here's a signature control. And of course, you can apply for that policy. And basically, it has now sent it to the underwriter. One other capability that I want to show you. Here's the application we just entered. We can now upload a document. So I can just click, choose a document, upload it, and I uploaded it. And then you can view all the uploads here. And there you go. According to this one, we have entered two. This particular application wasn't submitted to the underwriter yet. So that's why we were still able to upload it. The application that we had uploaded already was at the underwriter. So here we go. So you can see how you can view uploaded. So this is again a widget in Graphite that you can drag and drop and load and view all kinds of documents, Word, PDF, Excel, and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the application definition. The one thing that I wanted to show you guys was controlling different parts of this display. So this is the new business home screen, right? And it has a lot of little things. It has this app bar, it has this title, it has these two links, it has this whole panel with the detail, with application number, status, insured agent, county, and all these links. So suppose if we wanted to disable the agent who we are logged in as, we're logged in as agent. Suppose the company decides that the agent should not see the status or the county for some reason. This is how easily you can do it in this application. And in Graphite, you don't have to write a single line of code to do this. So I log back in as a system user. I go to manage securities. I choose the agent. I choose the screen in which I want to prohibit the agent from doing something. So I can go here, go to application panel, go to detail. Let's say we prohibit the agent from uploading a document, attached documents modal link, and also have them not see the status item. All I have to do is undo that. I log out of as a system administrator. Now, anywhere if the agent is logging in, he or she will not see the status. And also, look, the attached clip is gone. So this setup, which is called role-based authorization, is completely generated for you by Graphite, and you can save a lot of time instead of building it. and it's an extremely complex logic to build these role-based authorizations. So with that, let's open this project inside Graphite, and let's kind of review all the stuff that was needed for it. So I'm going to double-click on Graphite. As you can see, I have a ton of different versions of Graphite on my machine because I'm constantly either testing or developing. It automatically opened up this project. I will provide a installer for this project in the webinar, so you can install it on your local implementation folder, and you guys can open it as well. Obviously, you know how to open. You can click on this, click open, and of course, I have a lot of projects, so it takes a few seconds, longer than usual. And here's where you can scroll down, find Franklin and FIP, and open it. But it's already open here. So let's look at the objects in this project. So there's a lot of domains. So for example, all the objects related to import to taking in an application, I have put in this domain. All the information related to handling policy, all the roles in that policy, agent, customer service rep, insured, all of those things are in this domain. So all the security related entities are in this domain. All the rating tables, those rate tables I showed you to store all that information, I have kept it here. All the screens, all the views, all the web pages are in this. So there's workflow, emails that go back and forth. That I've set up here. Everything to do with addresses set up there. That's what's called domain-driven design. You code your application based on the business that you're dealing with, and so that's how we have built this application. So now let's take the application object. So here, like I told you in the first webinar, an object or an entity or a class, they're interchangeable. So in this case, the application entity has all the properties to take in that application that I showed you in the PDF document. So if you click on this diagram, you will see the composite view of this particular entity, right? And again, Graphite generates this. So another advantage of Graphite is it generates documentation as you code. Programmers don't like doing a lot of documentation because they're really busy trying to solve the problem that they've been given. So one of the things that we decided to do when we built Graphite is to make sure that take that pain away from the developer and provide good documentation as you're coding. So here, all I had to do was like add properties like this using that add property, and then they show up here. Properties themselves can be other entities. As you can see, this property is called application data of type application data, which itself is another whole application. But if you look at number, that's of type text, so I can't click it. So anytime if it's another application, you can click another entity, you can click and go to that particular entity and look at the details. Here is a list. So here's a property called attachments, which is a list of another entity called media file, and you notice this is all gray, whereas this is all white. That means anything that's white is stuff that I added in this project. Anything that's gray is either inherited or it came in from a library. Media file entity came in from a media library, and so they're all gray. You didn't make any changes to it. Once again, quickly, I go back to the home project, and if I click edit project here, it shows all the libraries that I've used. I've used the authorization library to support that role-based authorization. We know we use core library for previous demos. I have some charts in this project, so I'm using the graphs library, uploading and downloading files, or in the media library. Address, again, address is multi-locale. I'm using just the United States addresses, and the workflow to support workflow processing. I'm using that library as well. So anyway, one other thing, if you do Control Tab, it shows you all the open windows, so you can quickly go to each of the open windows. So I go back to application, and you can see how you can build this pretty thoroughly. Again, when I go into another entity, it's pretty much the same detail. Just like any good object-oriented programming language, entities have methods in them. So that's this tab. If you go to the behaviors tab, you'll see all the public methods in this particular entity. So for example, if you look at discard application, that's a flow chart which simply has a sign shape to it. It basically takes in as an input application of type application and returns that same thing. And if you double click on it, it's simply setting the status to an enumeration. In Graphite, the way you use enumeration is if you type the enumeration name and put colon, it will show you all the different enumerations and you can choose it. So again, let's take a little bit more complex one. This one has a little bit more shapes. It has 2 assigned states. It has a data lookup, which is a select statement, and then another assigned statement. So we look at more complex applications. For example, generating an application number is a much more complex shape. We'll look at a really complex ones in a few minutes here. So that's entity design. And let's talk about, well, let's go take a look at all the entities. So we looked at all the entities here, but there's a diagram in Graphite which shows all of them in its full view. So here is the screen. So you go to the sidebar, you click diagrams, you end up at this screen. Here's the screen that shows all the entities in this project. So as you can see, there's a lot of entities. Now, each of these entities become a database table. We look at how complex this database is. And again, since if you use Graphite, you don't have to create each one of these tables one by one. Graphite uses code first, and basically it generates the database for you. And if you look in here, most of these are hanging around by themselves. But if you look at this, there's company and there's agency. What that means is agency is a class that is inherited from company. So when you look at company, company has address, email, fax number, name, phone number, and tax ID. But if you look at agency, agency inherited from company, so it got all its properties in gray. And I added 2 more properties to agency. That is a list of agents of type agent and a text property called number. That's the agent number or agency number. So again, if you go into agent, you'll see the details about the agent. Agent itself is inherited from user. So you can build fairly, not just fairly, you can build extremely complex object model that mimics your business, and it does it in the exact perfect way. Once again, when you use scripting languages like Python or PHP or Node.js, you're not going to be able to build object-oriented classes. Now, you may ask, why is that important? For writing a good business application, object-oriented programming is the only way to go for the back-end part of your application. So you may be able to create applications, agents, and stuff like that in those languages. But because of things, framework layers that have been added that helps you mimic, and the word mimic is very important, mimic object-oriented programming. So you can do that, but true inheritance polymorphism don't exist in those languages. So here's an example of a polymorphism. So let's take a look at polymorphism. So if you take a look at this entity called rate group, there's nothing in it, no properties, no behaviors. But there's a template in there. What that means is template is what we call as an interface in regular object-oriented programming. This rate group entity says, I don't have any behaviors, I don't have any, properties, I don't have any behaviors, but I have templates. What that means is if anyone inherits from me, they have to have a behavior or a flow chart built which takes in this input and it will return these outputs. Okay? So going back to our diagram, I'm going to show you how this is used in this particular project. So if I do rate group has inherited 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different entities. So if you take rate group 0, it inherits from rate group, which means it has to override that find rate behavior. And it basically says, for rate group 0 table, this is the flow chart to extract the rate. For rate group 2, the find rate is going to be different. It's a much more complex table. Maybe this house which is controlled by this rate table is near a water body. Okay? So now you may say, okay, what's the use of this? I could have simply said, if rate group 0, go to that find rate. If rate group 2, go to that rate group 2's find rate. Well, polymorphism, if people truly understand object-oriented programming, is when you're calling a polymorphic method, you just call the base class's object and you pass the matching rate table. And I'm not going to go to detail about polymorphism. That's something that you guys can Google and look up if you want to learn good programming practices. Here we use the base class, we call the find rate, which is not even a real behavior, and we pass the matching rate table. During runtime, it figures out where to go. So what is the advantage of it? If your client comes up and says, I have a whole new rate table, can you please put it into the application? You don't have to come in and modify any flow chart. All you have to do is add another rate group and go code its find rate. And that's it. You're done. Again, what is the advantage of good object-oriented programming? You don't touch anything that was tested. All you did was add a new entity and a new behavior, and you're done. So you reduce the amount of testing, you reduce pretty much everything that usually messes up testing, and people go back and forth. They're going to go, you change this, the old thing that was working is broken now. Those are the things that you avoid, and hence you develop better applications that can be given to your client. So we looked at entity design and polymorphism. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at that complex calculation. Remember I talked about when we push the quote button. So let me look at it. Let me show you again. When we push this quote button, we're doing a complex calculation to calculate that number. Let's go see what the code behind the quote button is. Once again, to get to any view in Graphite, you copy the HTML name, you go into Graphite, you paste it here, you click on whatever that shows up, and there you go. You get to your view that you're dealing with. And as you can see, we can confirm that it matches it. Now, just getting to things in Graphite is reason enough to use Graphite, because in handwritten code, by the time you find the code between the quote button, it'll take a good hour, especially if you're a brand new developer to a project. So here I push the control button and I click on quote. It takes us to the details, and here's the on click. And when I click on the on click, here's the code that was written for the click of the quote button. So it does a bunch of stuff, but the important thing that we're going to look at is this behavior called calculate rating that's inside this entity called NFIP insurance data. So to navigate to that, we click on this 3 lines and we navigate to that flow chart. So this flow chart looks pretty simple. It calls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 behaviors. And then it has a evaluate shape where it adds up a whole bunch of these values that were returned by all these behaviors and calculates that total premium due. And so that total premium due is what's actually put in here. Okay, so and this flow chart is actually called 7 times to fill in all of the things that you had seen here. So let's look at this flow chart, right? We look at a couple of things, and it is also exposed as a REST service, REST and SOAP service. So let's look at the first one. First flow chart is called create NFIP data. That itself calls a couple of other flow charts. Then it comes back and it calls this flow chart called is post firm. So we go in there, and here it does some fairly complex logic. And then it comes back here, and then it calls determine rate. Determine rate calls another flow chart called find rate table, which is fairly complex. There's loops. And then it does the polymorphic call. Sorry, you can go into any one of these by clicking on this. And then it does some assigned shape. It calls another behavior. So you can write really, really complex flow charts. Now, one thing Graphite provides you as documentation. Remember, calculate rating exists in that behavior. By clicking on this, you end up in that behavior. If you go into behaviors, you see that behavior there. A list of behaviors that are inside this entity. Now, if you look at calculate rating, there's a little diagram here. So if I click on that, what it does is, and this is something programmers find really useful, where has this behavior being called? It's being called from all these other behaviors. But what does it, this is the call stack. It shows all of the calls that this particular behavior is making. So you see the complete call stack on how complex this behavior is. So that is the full call stack. So calculate rating called a create, which called another create, then it called is post firm, then it called determine rate, which called find rate table, then which itself called does rate table match and is between 75 and 81. Here's the polymorphic call. So this full structure shows how complex this calculation is. And we'll look at the code generated for something like find rate table in a few minutes here when we do a build. But that kind of shows you how complex you can write code in Graphite. And notice how this is a data lookup. Any business person can look at this and understand it. But when you write it in code, they may not be able to. I have literally shown this to actuaries who work in the insurance companies, and just by reading this flow chart, they were able to understand what it was doing. Moreover, I don't have to write this comment. Graphite will generate the comment for me. And so, of course, I can override it or not. In this case, I had overwritten it, so I'm not going to save that. So you can put comments. Like I said in the last webinar, you don't have to put comments. Graphite generates the comment for you, but also puts it in the generated code. So that's how you can build complex applications, right? We looked at polymorphism. We looked at role-based authorization. So how did I create that role-based authorization? So once again, if we log in as the system administrator, which is Scott H., and I go in here, this screen, as you will see in Graphite, I didn't have to do any of these fields and all of this stuff. They were all done for me from Graphite. Once again, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into Graphite. I paste it. You see that by the icon, I know that is the view icon, so I'm going to click on it. Here's the screen. This whole screen was designed by simply pasting this element pack, and it took care of building all this, all the logic behind it. Everything was provided for us, and all I had to do was build, and Graphite took care of all that. So that's designing security groups. There's a document that explains that in the Knowledge Center. Feel free to take a look at that. So let's talk about unit testing, okay? So remember in the PDF that I showed you earlier, the customer had given us 15 unit tests. In Graphite, we can set up unit tests. So what I did was I created a unit testing entity. So when you create an entity in Graphite, you can say my entity contains unit tests. And when you create an entity that has unit tests, as in this case, you have the capability to add test flowcharts. Let me show you an example of a test flowchart. This test flowchart is very, very simple, and anybody in your QA department can build this out for you. Step one for the test flowchart is build. So it follows a standard testing paradigm called arrange, act, assert. So any good testing software should follow this methodology. You arrange the dummy data or test data, then you act on it by calling whatever method or whatever behavior or whatever page, whatever it is that act is. And then when the results come back, you assert the results. Is this number match? Is this screen look proper? Whatever it is. So products like Selenium do all that stuff. In Graphite, you can test all your business flow charts, as in calculation of premium, calculation of a value of a portfolio. All of that can be tested right from within Graphite. So here I have a flow chart that simply sets up some data, like for example here coverage 35,000, 10,000, and so on. Then it calculates the calculate rating flow chart and passes in the test data, and obviously this guy returns that back with filled in information. And then I'm asserting data. I'm saying, okay, did the value of 35,000 did it get updated? Was the rate that picked up matching exactly what the customer told me, and things like that. So I can set up any number of such tests. So in this case, you can have one test that tests everything, or several tests as I have shown you here. Now in Graphite, how do you run these tests? So there's a screen in Graphite that helps you run these tests. So if you go to this test screen, and this is what was failing last time, so this time you'll see that it will run. So if I push run, because I saved that screen, it compiled it, and now it's actually running the test. So the first time, of course, since it just compiled, it's loading all the DLLs and the Entity Framework database. So it's going to take a few seconds. And here it runs each one of those assertions. And if the flowchart returned valid values, you'll see green. And you can group these different tests. So it'll show you like that. If any of them didn't calculate this will properly, it'll show red. And you can basically go debug your statement. This also allows for you to build applications with Graphite with test-driven methodology. So if I run the second guy, you'll notice that it's pretty much instantaneous. So what is test-driven coding? Sometimes what developers like to do is they like to develop this flowchart step by step by testing. So you can put this flowchart in debug mode, go to settings, switch on a debug session, and let's say we were halfway through this flowchart. Set the debugging there as well. Now I can go to my test, and if I push run, it's obviously going to compile because we switched on a debug session, which it didn't have to. Okay, so there's some problem here. There's some error. I'm going to have to look at this again and see why it failed. Let's do a build. Oh, I know why, yeah. It's compiling the whole project. I just went to the build window to build it. So let's go run the test now. And you'll see since we put it in debug mode, and I see it went over to that flow chart. Now I can step through. Now since we set the breakpoint and determine rate, it then goes over there and so on and so forth. So you can basically code while you're debugging, which is called test-driven development. Developers like to build that way. Of course, once I push continue, it came back and showed you the results. So that's one of the things that you can do in Graphite. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys. I'll open it up for questions with related to this. Sorry guys, when I pushed run, it compiled and gave me errors. That's because this run method, that's a bug in Graphite. Run method only compiles certain portions of Graphite, and so it didn't find the relevant files and it failed. If that happens, just go to build and do a full purge and do a full build. I'm going to have my platform developers look into why that happened. But go ahead, I'm going to open it up.
Thank you, Chris. Team, any questions? You can unmute yourself and you can ask this question. Pratik, Bhaskar, Sesha, any questions? Or else, if you're finding it difficult to unmute yourself, you can always type your questions in the chat box. I can read them for you. Okay, so Bhaskar is asking, where can we find recordings of the previous webinars? Sorry, it's Pratik. Pratik, hope you are part of the WhatsApp group. I can share the link where we are updating all the webinar recordings, or else you can go to you can go to Graphite Studio Challenge / graphitestudiochallenge.incubatehub.com/discussions. There also you will find all the recordings of the previous webinars. I'm going to type the URL here so that it will be easier for you. Any other questions? I would like to be part of the WhatsApp group. This is my first time joining this webinar. Yeah, sure, Pratik. I will send both the links. One is the discussions where you will find all the webinar recordings and all the sample documents. And another one will be the WhatsApp group. You can click on that link and you can join the WhatsApp group. I'm going to type it in a second. Any other questions? Okay, Bhaskar Das is asking, do we have option to refresh the page partially? I have created a sample application, but it refreshes page completely, it seems. Chris, do you have answer for that? Chris, we are not able to hear you. Looks like some problem with Chris' audio. It's okay, team. What we can do is I'm going to share our WhatsApp group and the discussions page where you can find the webinar recordings and the sample documents. Please copy that, and please try to join the WhatsApp group also. So the mentor Chris Galley is there in the group. He will try to answer all your questions. So here I have provided you 2 different links. Please click on them, and please join the WhatsApp group. Okay. Thanks a lot, Chris, for all your time.